Welcome to True Crime 101 with Murder Friends, the podcast where three friends from three different countries talk about murder. My name's Hannah and I'm British.
I'm Anna and I'm American.
My name's Alana and I'm Canadian.
In addition to our longer episodes, True Crime 101 talks you through key true crime cases and theories. This week, I want to tell you about Donald Neilson. Have either of you heard of him?
Donald, no.
Donald.
Not Dennis. Donald Neilson.
What?
Must be a cursed surname.
Yeah. Did he wear glasses?
I don't think so. If he does, then Alana, could you get some?
Yeah, of course.
So much. Fair warning for this one, it's a little bit grisly, but I do need to include some of the details or else the story doesn't really make sense. It's also not like the shortest of stories, so if you all have like drinks and like maybe a protein bar,
Get comfortable.
you're okay. Basically just get a handful of almonds and we'll begin. Donald Neilson was born on the 1st of August 1936 as Donald Nappy in Bradford. When he was just 10 years old, his mother passed away from breast cancer, and she was just 33 years old. A year later, he was caught breaking into a shop, but as he was 11 and had recently lost his mother, police kind of slapped him on the wrist and gave him a caution. In 1955, at age 18, he marries Irene Tate. Donald was a national serviceman in the army and his wife convinced him to leave. Irene and Donald had a baby girl called Catherine in 1960, and Donald decided to change the family name from Nappy to Nilsen about 4 years later. He'd suffered quite a lot of bullying at school and in the army due to his surname. He either took this name from a man he bought a taxi firm off or off the back of an ice cream van. No one really knows. I sure as shit don't care, but I'm going to refer to him as Nilsen from now on. The shop-breaking incident when he was 11 was just the first in what would turn out to be numerous criminal acts. He had worked as a carpenter, a builder, and that taxi firm he'd bought failed at any success. He started burgling houses, and in the early days it's thought that he committed around 400 burglaries.
Oh my god.
It's so many. He had a variety of nicknames from The Phantom to Handy Andy. He adopts a much more sinister nickname, but what a fucking dickhead name is Handy Andy.
So
I
bad.
bet he hated it too.
Yeah. Nielsen wasn't really like a dumb bitch when it came to these burglaries either. He used to adopt patterns of behaviour for a couple of weeks, and then he'd switch to another pattern to throw police off his scent. One example of this was that he would steal a radio from a house and then discard it nearby. And once police realised that this was a pattern, he abandoned it and moved on to another. So it was sort of like throw the police off the scent. Burgling houses, though, was a low payoff job. After one burglary in a house in Cheshire, he stole guns, ammunition, and decided that he would sort of up the ante. He started robbing post offices, and he committed 18 armed robberies between 1971 and 1974. His behaviour and the robberies became increasingly more and more violent, as he realised that he needed to both sort of protect himself from being caught or suffering any injury, and also a lot of people weren't exactly happy about being robbed, and so they tried to protect their belongings. In 1972, he had a really, really violent altercation in a small post office in Lancashire. The post office was attached to a house, and he broke in at night. The postmaster and his wife were woken up by a man in their bedroom. I think that's terrifying.
Yes.
It's like nightmare fuel.
God.
So the postmaster jumps up and he tries to tackle Nielsen, and his wife scrambles to call the police. Nielsen pulls out the sawn-off shotgun, and whilst they were fighting, he puts on a West Indian accent, super fucking racist, and says, "This gun's loaded." The postmaster notices that the gun's sort of pointing at the ceiling and says, "This is a direct quote, we'll find out if it's loaded." And the postmaster pulls the trigger himself.
Damn.
What a hard ass.
It blasts. I know. I was just like, that's the most metal thing I think I've ever heard.
I know.
It blasts these two huge holes in the ceiling. They continue fighting. The gun's useless now. And Nielsen, in the end, beats the postmaster to the floor. And then he flees the scene. He leaves with nothing. After this, the violence sort of ramps up and he starts killing people. In February 1974, he murders sub-postmaster Donald Skepper at a post office in Harrogate. In September of the same year, he murders another sub-postmaster, Derek Aston, in Baxenden. Just 9 weeks later, he murders another sub-postmaster, Sidney Grayland.
What does he have against the post office? Like,
That's where all the money is.
Yeah, like easy
but
targets.
bit harsh.
He brutally attacks Sidney's wife, Margaret, as well. Margaret does, however, give a really good description and is able to produce with the police a very, very accurate photo fit of Nilsen. At this point, he's killed 3 people, and after the second murder, he gains a new nickname. Derek Astin's wife had a television interview, and she described the man who killed her husband as, quote, so quick he was like a panther. At the end of the interview, the reporter says, where is the Black Panther? And this is where he gets the nickname Black Panther.
Ugh.
What?
I think that's kind of shitty. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, considering the other sort of... No.
yeah, no fun. Yeah. So it's a pretty bad story so far, and I'm going to say it. It's about to get a whole lot worse.
Oh, dear.
So in 1972, prior to the murders, Nilsen read a story in the Daily Express newspaper over the dispute of the will and estate of a man called George Whittle. George had owned a successful coach company and on his death had left his fortune to his mistress, Dorothy, and their 2 children, Ronald and Leslie. George's estranged wife didn't receive a penny, and so it was kind of like reported in the newspapers because she started this claim against his estate. George's daughter, Leslie Whittle, received £82,500, which would have been worth just under £1 million in today's money.
Nice.
So there's a lot of money sort of floating around. Nilsen decided that the family would be a really, really good target for a kidnap plot, and he intended on kidnapping either Dorothy, George's widow, or their son, Ronald. Some 3 years later and meticulous planning, on the 14th of January 1975, Dorothy, the mother, returned to the family home at 1:30 a.m. She checked in on her 17-year-old daughter Leslie, took 2 sleeping pills and went to bed. Nilsen creeps into the family home, having cut the telephone wire which he believed to be the burglar alarm. And as he's prowling through the house, he encounters Leslie Whittle by complete mistake. In his eyes, he has no option but to take Leslie as his kidnapped victim. He gags her, he drags her to his stolen car, and he ties her up. It was freezing cold, this is January, and she's wearing only a dressing gown and slippers. When Leslie did not come downstairs for breakfast that morning, her mother went up to her room, saw the empty bed, and found a ransom note. Nilsen had left the note on a box of sweets, kind of fucking weird, demanding a £50,000 ransom, and left some really specific instructions on what denominations the money should be in and how it was to be delivered. The note wasn't handwritten. It wasn't cut out of newspapers, letter by letter. It wasn't typed on a typewriter or anything. It had been typed out on a piece of Dymo tape. Do you know what that is?
No.
No. So it's the stuff used for labelling. Do you know when you have that kind of black thin tape and you put it in a machine and you spin around letter by letter and stamp? It's like an analogue label maker.
Jesus.
Yeah. What?
Yeah. So he typed the entire ransom note on one of those.
What? Just it's a really long one.
Yeah. The thing was 6 feet long.
That's
Oh my
my goodness.
God.
He really is a
That
psychopath.
so creepy.
I know.
It's just, imagine sitting there writing a ransom note on a fucking piece of Dymo tape, letter by letter, stamp, turn the dial, stamp, turn the dial. That's the.
That must have taken him all day.
Honey, work
It's probably
smarter,
why it
not
took him
harder.
3 years.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just borrow a typewriter. Dickhead. In his very, very weird ransom letter, ransom tape. Well, I don't know what to call it
Ransom
now.
label. It's just one big label.
Ransom label.
Ransom.
Ransom label. He decided he wanted one of the family members to go to a phone box and wait for a call, and it was decided that Leslie's brother Ronald would go to the telephone box and wait for the call that night. Sadly, this case is littered with blunders. The first being that a local reporter had caught wind of the kidnap plot and provided a story to a local news outlet who ran stories on it. The police immediately removes Leslie's brother from the phone box in case the kidnapper was watching. The phone box did ring, they determined, at midnight, but there was no one there to answer it. That night, Nilsen attempts to raid the Dudley Freightliner terminal and in a fit of rage shoots Gerald Smith, a security guard, in the back 6 times. He had stolen a car but abandoned it a short distance from where a very injured Gerald lay. The police didn't notice this car because they were obviously investigating the shooting. They didn't notice that the car was there for 8 days.
Oh, fuck.
And when they finally, and when they finally look into it and they had the car searched, they found a recording of Leslie's voice on a tape recorder, Dymo tape similar to which the ransom label had been typed on, along with gun, ammunition, and a sleeping bag. They linked the type of gun found in the car, ballistics evidence, and fingerprints they found on gun cartridges in this attack to the Black Panther murders. So basically, if the police had realised that the car was suspicious and dealt with it sooner, they could have linked the post office murders to the kidnap of Leslie, and then they would have been able to get that really, really good photo fit from Margaret Grayland. But they didn't. The next day, Leslie's brother Ronald returns to the phone box at 11:30 p.m. The phone rings, and he answers it, and he's played a recorded message of Leslie telling him to retrieve a note taped to the inside of the phone kiosk. Ronald immediately verifies to the police that this was Leslie's voice. This was a recording of Leslie's voice, and he was like, it's definitely the kidnapper. It's not someone playing a prank. So it was then agreed that he would be the one to drop off the money. He attended a police station and was delayed as police sort of made their arrangements to sort out the cash and protection and everything. He was delayed there for 2 hours.
What are these people, like, what are they doing? Like, what?
It just seems like bumbling idiots, the whole way through this.
Like, do they know how to, be police officers? Like,
do you even know how to police?
Do you know how to police? Like, I feel like, the 70s cops always get bad raps, don't they? Like,
yeah,
the cops in the 70s just, sucked.
So the message he found in the first phone box, again typed on this weird label stuff, directed him to go to another phone box in Kidsgrove. This one was in a post office, where he retrieved a further message, again typed on this Dymo tape, to go to a place called Bathpool Park. As the post office murders and the kidnaps were not linked by the police agencies who were in charge of Leslie's disappearance didn't liaise with any of the local sort of police agencies. At this point, Ronald was some 60 miles from home, and he didn't know the area at all well. He got lost twice on the way to Bathpool Park and arrived an hour and a half late. He drives into the park and flashes his headlights as requested by the kidnapper, and he waits. But there was no one there. No one came. Bathpool Park was searched by police, but nothing was found. And then everything just goes stone cold. No further messages, no further phone calls, nothing. They put a media blackout on it after the first kind of blunder with the local news station, and this was lifted on the 10th of February 1975, so nearly a month later. Still nothing. On the 5th of March 1975, Ronald and the chief superintendent who was running the investigation made appearances on local and national news. The next day, a headmaster of a local school called the police as one of his students has handed him a piece of Dymo tape that had the words, "Drop suitcase into hole." And another people had passed over a torch which they had found wedged into the grill of a ventilation shaft. This ventilation shaft was for something called the Hare Castle Tunnel, and this tunnel housed a canal. So the canal needed these really big ventilation shafts because the boats that were going through them chugged diesel fumes, and it was choking inside. So some of these shafts were just a couple of feet wide, and some of them were fucking massive. They look more like big circular buildings with grates around them, sort of 1 story, 8 foot, 10 foot tall, big, bunker type things. And inside them, they housed a connecting series of tunnels which sort of dropped and twisted and turned. One of the smaller shafts in Bathpool Park was referred to locally as the Glory Hole.
Oh, nice.
Naturally.
Which is nice.
It's not really a park, is it, though, without a glory hole?
What sort of parks are you going to, Anna?
Fair point.
So the police decided to search Bathpool Park again, starting with the Glory Hole. In the Glory Hole.
How many times can we make you say that uncomfortably throughout the whole episode?
Glory Hole, Glory Hole, Glory Hole. In it, they found more of the Dymo tape, the label maker itself. They searched a smaller shaft and found nothing. They arranged to search the third and largest shaft, but they had to get it checked first for gas fumes. When it was deemed safe to enter, they went in a day later. I also realised I just said the word shaft.
I know, I was I was going to bring it up.
This whole episode
I was I'm sorry, the what?
Riddled.
This is
I'm
bad.
just Handy Andy, glory hole shaft. So horrible. They went down the first ladder, which was 22 feet, onto the landing. They went down a further ladder, which was another 45 feet, and they found a tape recorder. They went down to the next landing, the third landing, which was a further 54 feet.
Jesus.
And there they found, so they're like deep underground, there's like no sunlight, it's really dark, kind of as gross as you would imagine it to be. And there they found a sleeping bag, a foam mattress, a survival blanket, and they also found the body of Leslie Whittle, who was hanging from a wire noose with her feet 6 inches from the floor.
Oh my God.
Underneath there was another landing, and there they found some sticky plaster strips that had been kind of fashioned into a blindfold, some trainers, more Dymo tape, a microphonist cable, a reporter's notepad and some trousers. Of all of the items that they recovered, there were quite a few. Police were only able to lift one partial fingerprint, and no match for it could be found on their databases. So there is a bit of speculation about how Leslie died. While she was found hanging by her neck, she didn't die of strangulation, she didn't die from hanging, but rather something called vagal inhibition. If she fell from one platform to another with her neck slightly constrained, it could have caused her to go into shock, which triggers the vagus nerve, and that could just make her heart stop.
Oh,
When Leslie's body was found, she weighed only 7 stone. She was 17 years old, and it was clear that she had lost quite a considerable amount of weight. She had no traces of food in her stomach or intestines, and it's theorised that after 2 failed ransom drops, Leslie was abandoned in the ventilation shaft and just sort of left to die.
Oh my God.
Jesus Christ.
I haven't heard of this story before, and when I read that bit, it was just like the biggest like gasp of like shock and horror.
Makes
It
you
was
want to
so horrible.
cry. Think of like
know.
being not only just being like in a creepy tunnel underground, but being so far down and then being left there. Like that's fucking nightmare fuel.
It's horrible, it really is. Initial attempts to find the kidnapper kind of proved fruitless, but in December 1975, so that same year, 2 police officers were sitting in their little car, their little Panda car, by a main road in Mansfield, North Nottinghamshire. This is about 60 miles east of Bothwell Park and where Leslie's body was found, and they see this like shifty looking fucker carrying a holdall. And as he walks past the car, he sort of like turns his face away. So the police officers, they were called Tony White and Stuart Mackenzie, were like, that's suspicious. So they call him over and they begin questioning him.
Did they start doing some policing? Is this when they started policing?
Oh my God, Anna, you're onto something. You are onto something here. As if this story couldn't go like any more bananas. The man pulls out a sawn-off shotgun from his bag and he orders the police into their own car by gunpoint.
Fuck, bet they weren't expecting that.
It was a surprise, motherfucker. So he jams the gun, he sits in the back and he jams the gun into like Stuart's armpit and orders them to drive to a location that was about 6 miles away. Stuart starts driving but says to the man, we're facing the wrong direction, so I'm going to have to turn the car around at some point. And the man's like, yeah, that's fine, just carry on driving. Whilst they're driving, the man then asks Tony if he has any rope. Tony's like, I know I don't got any rope, but I'm going to pretend I'm looking for some. Tony's sort of like looking off to one side, and they're approaching a junction. Stuart sort of jerks the steering wheel one way and then the other, asking the man which way he should turn at this approaching junction. This makes the man sort of like look up at the junction, and it also makes him drop the gun slightly. Seeing this as like the perfect opportunity, Tony turns, grabs the gun, yanks it forward, and Stuart slams on the brakes. The gun fires, so a sawn-off shotgun in like a tiny car must have been fucking deafening, and the bullet grazes Tony's hand. Stuart falls out of the driver's seat, banging his head on the road, and shouts for help. They're outside, they're on a junction, and they're sort of outside a fish and chip shop. 2 men who were queuing at the fish and chip shop run over and help restrain the man that the police were like, yeah, I need some help. And when I say restrain, I mean that they like beat this man to the ground, and then they beat the ever-loving fuck out of him.
Oh, fuck.
To the point where the police had to step back in to try and protect him.
Oh my God. It's like the guy, do you know when there's a terrorist attack? It might have been the last one, that like bigger one we had in London, and the guy like pulls like this swordfish or whatever off the wall.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember
Yeah.
that? And like chases him down and
Amazing.
fights him with like the swordfish.
Yeah, there was like it was, I don't know what, it was like a sword, something
it was like
ridiculous.
Something
off the
ridiculous like
wall.
that.
And
Yeah.
it's like, it's literally something is going down in the street. This guy might have like a bomb vest. You have no idea.
Yeah.
He grabs it off the wall and just like runs at him. Like, holy
Yeah.
shit.
I just love people like that in stories. I think
Yeah.
they are the salt of this earth. I think they are amazing. So there's a mugshot of this man and his face is just like fucked up, where these people have just like railed into him. The police handcuff the man to some railings and they call for some backup. I just love that part. The police are like, help. And the two guys were like, let's wreck this bitch. It's just, amazing. So an investigation was launched into this whole armed carjacking moment, but they found that the man's fingerprints matched the partial fingerprint found in the ventilation shaft. And obviously that man was Donald Neilson. He confesses to the kidnap of Leslie in an 18-page statement. It goes to trial, and the trial is just like a whole nother level of just horror. The defence argued that Neilson hadn't killed Leslie, that she'd fallen from one landing to another. The length of wire that was used to restrain her, that was looped around her neck, from her neck to where it was secured was 5 feet long. And then from her neck to her feet was 4 feet. So the length of wire and Leslie was therefore like 9 feet of length, effectively. And the gap between the landings was 6 feet 11 inches. So as Leslie left one landing, whether she fell or whether she was pushed, the wire snagged on something, leaving her feet 6 inches from the floor. If the wire hadn't snagged, she probably would have landed on her feet.
Oh no.
The defence also argued that Nilsen had provided comfort for her. He'd given her a mattress, a survival blanket, sleeping bag, book, magazines, newspapers. He's also like brought her food. And the prosecution were like, bullshit on pretty much everything. And in July 1976, Nilsen was found guilty of the murder of Leslie. He received a life sentence. Rather than sort of leave it at that, like a lot of judges would do, he was also found guilty of murders of Donald Skepper, Derek Aston and Sidney Grayland. He received a further 21 years for the kidnapping charge, 10 years for blackmailing of Leslie's mother, 3 10-year sentences for 2 burglary charges and 1 for possessing the sawed-off shotgun. He was acquitted of the attempted murder of Margaret Grayland and PC Tony White, because he obviously tried to shoot them. However, he was found guilty of the slightly lesser charges of inflicting grievous bodily harm on Margaret Grayland and possessing a shotgun with the intent of endangering life after the incident with the police officers in the car. The security guard that Nilsen shot 6 times died a year and 1 day later after the attack. A charge of attempted murder was laid on Nilsen, but due to some legal complications, the charge was not ultimately pursued. The charge was left to lie on file, which basically means that there's enough evidence to make a case, but it wouldn't be in the public's interest to pursue it, although it could be resurrected at a later date, at any point. Due to the severity of his crimes, the brutality, and just general, dickhead behaviour, it was deemed that Nilsen should receive a whole life term, something which is reserved in English law for the truly, the worst of the worst. After receiving his sentence, apparently his defence lawyer went to see him, and that he found him curled up in a ball in the corner of his cell, just crestfallen, morose, filled with remorse about his crimes. Piece of shit. I was like, I don't feel sorry for you. Sorry.
No.
So I know what you're thinking. You're wondering where Dennis Nilsen's wife is, right?
He didn't have, he
Do
had a
tell.
family.
Yeah. Well, they were still together whilst this all went on. Irene was arrested for cashing loads of stolen postal orders obtained during the robberies of the post offices. The night of Nilsen's arrest, Irene became worried that he hadn't returned from home, and she tried to burn a big wad of these postal orders in the fire. She tried to argue that Nilsen had forced her to do it. But in the end, she was sentenced to 12 months in prison. She was released after 8 months for good behaviour. Later in an interview, she says that if she hadn't been Nilsen's wife and just looking at her charges on a objective basis, she probably wouldn't have gone to prison. She wouldn't have received such a harsh sentence. But she said that everyone had sort of wanted blood after her husband's trial. And I was like, yeah, but...
Well, because he was, a horrific human being.
He's, literally the worst of the worst. Nilsen obviously tried to appeal numerous times. His last appeal was in 2008, but his whole lifetime sentence was upheld by a High Court judge. On the 17th of December 2011, he's taken from his cell in Norwich prison to a hospital because he was suffering breathing difficulties, and he died the next day. So that's the story of Dennis. Not Dennis Nilsen. That's the story. I nearly went for it then. That's the story of Donald Neilson, who is truly and I wrote, shit stain of a human.
Wow,
I
I've
can't
never heard
believe-
that story.
Yeah, I can't believe I've never heard of that. Is pretty, genuinely awful. And he was,
Yeah.
a career criminal.
I hadn't heard of it at all. And it was just the murders that in the post offices were so brutal that you thought that would, make it more of a well-known case.
Yeah.
And then this kidnapping, this horrific kidnapping of a 17-year-old girl, and ultimately her murder. I still hadn't heard much about it. Maybe other people have heard of it. I don't know.
No, it's.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know if just because, well, they're all horrific, but it's because of Dennis Nilsen. More people know about him, so the other Nielsen sort of got overseen
Pushed
now.
back.
Yeah, pushed back. No.
Probably.
No. This is why. But it was sad that with Leslie's kidnapping, that it was so just sort of bumbled, the whole thing, or it was also not the whole thing. Maybe it was a police's fault, of course, but there's a series of just errors that just occurred that just made it really unfortunate. But at least the two Dukes of Hazzard got redemption and got him in the end.
Men.
I know, that was
Those
amazing.
2 men.
Honestly, the whole story sounds like a movie. You have this buildup of crimes, you have a kidnapping, you have the worst creepy sets imaginable, then you have this fight in the police car and civilians getting in it and everything. Yeah, it sounds like a very terrifying movie.
But it's real life and terrible.
And we got to talk about glory holes, so
I'm really sorry.
thank you for that.
That was such a horrific
you.
story, and I'm like, hee, glory holes, shaft.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
Well, we have to find a way to lighten it up a little bit because it's just awful.
I think that's a really British thing to do. To be like, there's a hole in the ground, glory hole.
Yeah. Well, it's gallows humor.
It is gallows humor, you're right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's all we have for today. If you want to check out Hannah's sources, they'll be on our website, murderfriends.com. You can send us an email, murderfriendspod@gmail.com, if you have any suggestions on things we should watch or true crime 101s that you'd like us to maybe cover or look into. You can follow us on Twitter at murderfriendspd and Instagram at murderfriendspod. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.